Hello, and welcome back to an alternate reality world, where we are at the Griffonian Empire, back with Emperor Grover, and back to our decision. Last time we heard them out. We established a more democratic-styled rule, we defined our own authority, we had our first election, we calmed the people, and everything went well. In today's episode, things will be different. In today's episode, we are instead going to send in the tanks. These protesters are nothing but a potential repeat of 978, possibly paid for by foreign influences who bemoan the resurgent state of our glorious empire. Having legitimate concerns is acceptable, but attempting to undermine the emperor's authority is not. It is clear that only force will disperse this rabble. These rabble rousers. Just nukes the village. No, we're not doing that. That's too far. We're not supremacist. Not now, at least. Griffonian protests. As Grover looked out upon the rabble of protesters and dissents before him from a vantage point at the imperial palace, he felt as if the ghosts of 978 were coming to haunt the empire once again, this time with the intent of bringing it down for good. Grover knew that some reforms were necessary. It is impossible to resist against the flow of time. But as he saw the seeds of revolution being planted before his very eyes, he knew that tolerating these radicals would be the first step on a long road that would lead to his death. The radicals would bleed the empire dry through compromise, and once they inevitably grew dissatisfied, no matter how much was conceded, they would pounce upon his wicked nation, plunging the continent into another war. Should the events of 978 repeat themselves, hundreds of thousands of lives would be sacrificed at the altar of republicanism, as the Griffonian Republic had done all those years ago, achieving naught but death and wanton destruction in the end. The sheer intensity and scale of modern warfare had scarred Griffonia for the past few years, perhaps permanently, and Grover could not tolerate the possibility of subjecting the citizens to decades of warfare once more, due to his inaction, however slim such chances might be. The army would clear out the protesters while he consulted his closest advisors with what reforms would be necessary to keep the empire together. The lives of a few radicals who refused to stand down would be a small price to pay for averting another decade of strife. We'll see how brave they truly are. Mass crackdowns. The infestation is worse than we thought. It is not just occurring in Griffonian, but across the entire empire. Their numbers grow by the day, and their demands are becoming increasingly radical and unacceptable. The Reich Army will have to be mobilized to handle this issue as quickly as possible. Yes. Sadly, it must be done. It must be done. And it's on you. It's all on all of you. Oh well. You could have avoided all this. You know, you could have, huh? Yeah. You really could have. I mean, is it really that hard to just not fight? You didn't need to. The crackdown. The Reich Army moved into Griffonian with the speed and efficiency expected of a force that had fought its way across half of Griffonia, perfectly coordinating with the other units of the army, occupying similar sites of protest across the empire. The elements of the army chosen for this operation had been specifically selected for their discipline and restraint, as the Kaiser himself had given strict orders that no Griffin was to be harmed unless they violently resisted attempts to stop the protests. Griffonia already had enough Republican martyrs, and he had no desire to create any more. When the army informed the protesters that their gathering had been declared illegal, the majority of them decided that living to fight another day was far preferable to facing the hardened soldiers of the Reich army that now flooded into the city. Working in conjunction with the riot police, the streets of every city in Griffonia where protest had been active were cleared out, and in a remarkable peaceful manner. A few deaths had been unavoidable, as radical elements of the protest refused to stand down, but all in all, it was a clean and efficient operation. But such methods cannot sustain an empire forever, and the entire continent waited to see what the emperor's next move would be. A fitting lesson, if there ever was one. Yeah, definitely. Emboldened by seditious philosophies, these students who are supposed to be our bright future, that would inherit the order we fought so bitterly to restore, have turned their backs on the emperor. No doubt they conspire with the Republican remnants, or worse. Every creature who has been involved in this protest must be investigated thoroughly to determine their true motivations. We might have to do what has to be done. And will not regret it. I promise you that. We will not regret what must be done, as what must be done is right. We cannot regret it, as we can never regret something that was meant to happen. The arrests. After a few days of uneasy peace across the empire since the armed forces forcibly put it into the protest, the army made its next move. The protests themselves had been priorly organized and led by various student groups across the empire, and over the past few days, the army and police had been tirelessly working to identify the most dangerous groups and individuals amongst them. Once said threats had been identified, the army moved swiftly to arrest and detain them. Units of the army surged across the empire as soon as the order was given, breaking into secret meeting places and houses to round up the leaders of the movement as quickly and efficiently as possible. If even a few were to escape, the army, their sway over the protests, would most likely allow them to use the arrest as kindling for the flames of revolution and cause far more trouble than the protests had ever done. But no such future came to pass, as the army managed to arrest every Griffin of importance within the movement, leaving the rest of the protesters without any clear leadership to coordinate between the disparate groups that had united for the protests. A few days in prison will cool their heads. Muzzle the press. The newspapers and radio broadcasts are spreading wild hysteria with their biased reporting, showing us tyrannical murders of children, while the protesters are being whitewashed and abolished of their crimes. Free speech is dangerously radical policy that can convince the gullible masses to rise up in revolt. We have no choice but to silence the rabble-rousing journalists and promote those who remain loyal. I bet the person over there is a complete idiot. I bet the Empire's already been overthrown on that side. Even by that point, he allowed coverages? I know what has to be done. It might not be right. I know. And I wish something better could be done. But I'm doing what must be done to keep this Empire safe. I'm sure of that. How could I be wrong? How could I be wrong when I'm doing what is right? Muzzling the press. The government's reaction to the recent protests had not only created a great deal of unrest within the more liberally minded Griffins of the Empire, but it also whipped the media into a frenzy. The newspapers even some radio stations were scrambling to get statements from army personnel and to secure interviews with protesters. As the media's attention became more and more focused on the protest, the messages of the protesters was amplified and allowed to spread to millions of griffins outside of major cities of the Empire, causing a new wave of discontent. Although the Emperor had a degree of tolerance for criticism of himself and the government from the media, the situation had deteriorated to the point where allowing the media to spread whatever falsehoods they liked was inviting disaster. As such, a new imperial decree had temporarily suspended the freedom of the press, and the state now has final approval of anything put into newspapers or broadcasts across the airways. The Emperor hoped that, with the spread of subversion information stopped, the message of the protesters would soon be forgotten. That's one headache dealt with. The once and future Kaiser of Griffonian. In spite of everything, tension remains palpable, and unrest could very likely continue. The Emperor has decided, after long consultation with his advisors, to implement token reforms that will quell most of the moderate protesters, while ensuring that power remains centralized with the Emperor itself. The line of Grover, of the purest blood and most noble Griffin qualities, shall lead us now and forever. Yes. It is what must be done. Alright. After I do this one and read it, we're gonna pause the video for a little bit. I'm gonna do this middle path because you've already seen it, and then we'll continue on to do the right path. We'll do that together. The reforms of Grover. Although the Emperor had no desire to give in to the demands of the protesters, from the very start of the crisis it was clear to him that the Empire would not survive without reform. Continue from where the previous regent, Gabriel, left off, His Majesty Grover announced the dissolution of the Council of Nobles. Although this was not as large a blow to the power of nobility as it appeared, with the council being replaced by an advisory body that was, although more inclusive of different social classes than the previous body, still primarily composed of nobles. Despite this, the new council provides the common Griffin with much more political representation than the previous arrangements, and the news seems to have mostly calmed down the former protesters. Yay! With the regency over and Grover finally ruling, the young emperor is flexing his political muscles. A slew of political servants have been called to the imperial palace to help draft the policies that the emperor seeks to implement. Policies that will show the whole world that Grover's name means something once again. But I will see you in a little bit after I finish this middle path. We'll continue on with the right path and seeing the new content. I'll see you back in a bit. And we're back now that we've gone through that middle path. We're gonna reform the Kaiser party. Grover's reign saw an attempt to establish an imperial political party dedicated to furthering the cause and idea of monarchism and autocratic rule. Outside of the traditional methods of court politics, the attempt fell through, but we can learn from their mistakes and build a new and successful Kaiser party. Even in upholding tradition, one must learn to use innovative methods. The new Kaiser Party. The Kaiser Party has been a nominally controlling party within the Reichstag of the Empire ever since it was established. Despite this, the party itself serves as little more than a rubber stamping group for legislation pushed by the nobility and the Emperor. Initially formed as an attempt at creating a popular party that would convey the benefits of the Emperor's autocratic rule to the citizens of the Empire during the rule of Grover. The party quickly fell in public opinion, maintaining its majority through a combination of biased voting laws and a few electoral nudges from the nobility. The changing demographics of the Griffonian Empire have rendered the current status quo intolerable, and if the Kaiser is unable to present a strong democratic front supporting his rule, his position will grow very tenuous with time. Thusly, the Kaiser himself has sent a letter to the leaders of the Kaiser party, thanking them for their service and asking them to step aside and allow the Emperor's preferred candidates to take over the party. The Kaiser party itself will focus on clear and demonstrable benefits of the Kaiser's rule has brought to the Empire, as well as providing intelligence, and will research counter-arguments to the most common Republican screeds that can be found shouted on the streets. With any luck, the Kaiser party might be able to make Grover the most popular Kaiser the Empire has ever seen, or at the very least make the idea of an armed revolution unpalatable to Republicans. Reform is coming. Controlled opposition. Money changes Griffins. This is known. The Emperor's authority cannot be undermined, but a paid opposition, which will give the public an appearance of checks and balances, is the next step in bringing the Empire to a new age. We are certain that the opposition will be smart enough to read what we give them, and not attempt to propose radical ideas. Best not to bite the claw that feeds them, after all. That's pretty smart, actually. Kind of evil, but, you know, pretty smart. You could be both. Controlled opposition. As the Kaiser party now possesses a majority within the Reichstag, and with the position of Kaiser firmly in the claws of their leader, there is little that the other parties could do to challenge their power. But despite the Emperor's preferences for autocratic rule, he knew that the illusion of a democratic opposition to his rule had to be maintained at the very least. And a few grants of land there, and suddenly the leaders of the opposition parties within the Reichstag were very accepting of his suggestions. Not to say that he completely dominated their agendas, that would be pointless, but the more radical elements of their programs would be scaled back, slowly moving the idea of a fully Republican empire from a serious idea to be discussed to a radical, unthinkable proposal that no Griffin in the right mind would espouse. Managing the empire would certainly be easier if his opponents wasted their time debating with the Kaiser party within the Reichstag instead of organizing against him. Sometimes he would even let them propose legislation that the Kaiser party would work into a more reasonable form to be implemented. Allowing the opposition a few irrelevant victories would be a fine way of dispersing their anger. Useful tools. Reaffirm the Kaiser's role. Although the Empire can be proud of its long tradition and just laws, there are some issues that remain unresolved, because they were never strictly codified. One of them would be the legal definition of the Emperor's authority, which has varied depending on the ruler and circumstances. To prevent any future misunderstanding or disasters, it will have to be put to paper. Yes, that makes sense to me. That gives us imperial prerogative. The doctrine of imperial prerogative, or Vorrecht des Kaisers, has now been clarified and codified without any room for traitorous interpretation. Briefly paraphrased, it states that the Emperor indeed does not serve but rules, and may freely overrule any lower decision. convince the detractors. Even among those who support the Emperor, there are dissidents. Their grievances are not severe enough to merit punishment, but the Kaiser Party must project an image of strength and unity. Favors and concessions would surely be enough to secure their allegiance, while rooting out any idea of disobedience. Yes, that does make sense to me. I agree with that plan. Let's do it. Let's do it. 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 The Kaiser's speech. His Majesty Kaiser Grover took to the airwaves for the first time during his reign today, responding to the various criticisms recently laid at his government by the student protesters. The Kaiser expressed his sincere desire to be more connected to his subjects and to take their desires into account while ruling the Empire, but also stressed the importance of preventing a repeat of the great tragedy that befell the Empire during the Revolution. Indeed, the only thing that the Republicans had accomplished in the end was spilling the blood of the Griffins they claimed to represent, sending a generation to die at the barricades for their refusal to accept the Kaiser's God-given right to rule over all of Griffonia. The Kaiser claimed that he would not rule with an iron fist, and promised that further reforms were being worked on, warning his subjects to beware any radical promises a great deal of change through violent revolution. The Empire would change as it moved into a new era of modernity, but that was no excuse to simply charge forward with effective abandon. The Kaiser ended his speech by urging his subjects to have patience as the Empire adapted to the new challenges faced in this new era, and reminding them that progress must always be tempered by restraint, lest the whole Empire unraveled into chaos once more. Hurrah for the Empire! Now it's permit regionalism. Even with the modern communication technologies we have, the Empire domains are vast, which means that responses to events are not always as quick as we'd like. However, if we permit regions that are known to be pacified certain autonomies, it would make administrating our realm much more straightforward. We are prepared for the protests that will inevitably spring from the troublesome provinces. Okay. Give us some more recruited population, which is cool. Next we're gonna release the prisoners, which I'm interested about. But yeah, I'll go and show them, but also, I was honestly pretty curious as well what exactly it would be about if I tried out the other path. So I was like, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Why not? Regional collaborators. The imperial administration has been reformed with more autonomies awarded to the provinces. Now from Griffonheim to the furthest corners of the empire, we can find loyalists to rely on for information, and support on all of its exchange for some token decentralized responsibilities. Not all Griffins who are in prison for inciting insurrection are harboring true guilt. Some were simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, or were misblamed by their opportunistic enemies. By releasing those whose crimes are non-existent or minuscule, we shall garner the public's goodwill, while the real malcontents remain imprisoned until they repent for their misdeeds. Freedom for most. Woo! Freedom for most! Freedom for most! Good enough. As the Griffonian Empire expanded, it was inevitable that vast amounts of soldiers and political dissidents would be imprisoned due to the extreme ideological differences between the Empire and the wider continent. Many had expected that these prisoners would languish in imprisonment for years before being released, and that their status was especially controversial in the areas of the Empire that most recently reconquered. But in a rather surprising announcement, the Emperor himself declared that the time had come for the Empire to heal the wounds that had driven apart for so many years, and that he would be granting those guilty of lesser crimes against the Empire a pardon for their actions. A few days later, the largest release of prisoners in the entire history of the Empire, perhaps the world, occurred. The worst offenders would be kept incarcerated, of course. There were no need to endanger the populace by letting too many communists out, after all. Although this limited release might have disappointed some of the more hardline progressives within the Empire, for most it was a chance to reunite with loved ones that had been missing in the imperial prison system for years or even decades. The day of the release was marked with celebrations across the Empire, and the Emperor himself delivered a speech on the radio, reminding the newly released criminals that his kindness was not infinite, and that he would not be so generous to any who abused his kindness to return to a life of sedation and crime. Make sure everyone hears of this. Draft a Constitution. Ever since Grover I acquired the idol of Boris and formed our empire, the function of the state has always been organized through various customs, limited laws, precedents, and the emperor's character. It is time to synthesize the spirit of all these old rules and formalize the Griffonian way of ruling into a constitution. It shall rest on the pillars of autocracy, faith, and the Griffonian national spirit. Woo! Let's go, yay! Yay, woo! That's what we want. Probably. Maybe. Possibly. I don't know, my people want something. The Empire is now governed under the rules established in the Verfassung des Reichs. The Constitution affirms the supremacy of traditional principles and rests on the pillars of autocracy, faith, and the Griffonian national spirit. The new Reichskaiser. The storm is passing, and now we have crushed those foolish cries for democracy. It is time to appoint an official head of government. Many protesters called for such an appointment, but we will do so on our own terms, and the new Reichschancellor will serve only at the discretion of the Emperor. Well, you know, it's something, right? You're welcome. I don't even know why I'm researching that. I'm not even making guns right now. I forgot about that. I stopped making guns. I just put everything into tanks, which is amazing. Who needs guns when you can have tanks? Am I right? Or am I right? I'm pretty sure I'm right. So, the Reich Chancellor. Weiser, the leader of the Reich Party, has officially assumed the title of Reich Chancellor today at the behest of the Emperor. After a long ceremony in which he promised to uphold the laws and principles of the Empire to the highest degree, and a personal oath of loyalty to the Emperor himself. Although it was not done through an election as many would have liked, many Griffins are nevertheless happy that the Emperor has chosen to delegate some of his powers to a representative of an ostensibly democratic party. Though Eckpart is unlikely to challenge the Emperor on any of his commandments, he would do his best to advise the Emperor on how to better accommodate the wishes of his subjects, and how to use his great power to the greatest benefit of the Empire. Eckpart was not one to waste time, however, and immediately after his appointment ceremony had finished, he set out an accomplished the program of limited reform that the Kaiser party espoused to achieve a balance between the newly made democratic institution of the Empire and the absolute authority of the Kaiser. Avela's political advisor. He stops being a political advisor and then becomes a political advisor of a different type. Okay. Cool. So there's him. No description or anything, so whatever. A new empire for a new age. The Emperor has reshaped the Empire as he desired, and solved the crisis that threatened to end his reign before it had even truly begun. Now there's peace and stability in the Empire once more, and his subjects look forward to a long and prosperous life under the wise guidance of His Majesty. Götter Erden Grover den Kaiser! I don't know if this is the same event as in the last one, or if there's a different one depending on the path you took. I'm hoping there's a different one depending on the path you took, because, come on. There needs to be at least some difference, right? It's just like, well, now your country collapses. You went down the wrong path. This event is actually secretly your country collapses event now. Benito knocked and entered straightforward. I see. I don't have anything. There's anything I could say. Okay, yeah, that's the same event as before. So, yeah. So don't worry about that. That's the, if you want to see that event or see the descriptions of the middle path, well, check out the last series, because yeah. But yeah, there we go. I hope you enjoyed seeing the right side of this focus tree and seeing what happens if you stay with the right party and not go for the democratic side of things. We're still having some things, but you know, it's fine. We're all gonna be fine. I'm sure an empire like this will last for centuries and millennias. But I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell button. And as always, peace.